It's George Foreman versus Muhammad Ali. It's like the Roadrunner versus Wile E. Coyote, or Batman versus Superman, Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, Moe versus Larry, and Curly. I'm talking about a biblically sized Cain and Abel grudge match called Stainless Steel Man Sai versus Steve, and it's time to settle the score. This project is my nemesis. I failed 3 times. Today we're going to get it done and bag that noise on the 4th. Here you see a 1095 steel core with 410 stainless on either side, all ground clean and soaked in acetone before welding these mild steel sides to it, and then we'll cap the ends with welds as well for an oxygen-free airtight forge welding environment. Unlike routine carbon steels, stainless won't forge weld in the presence of oxygen unless you have a super duper toxically powerful flux, which we don't have. So we're going to have to use some sort of airtight container, and something like this is the method that most folks use. When forge welding temperatures are reached, I'm going to Randy Savage that mamma jamma with Herculean boomstick. Those are the names of my biceps. Multiple times on both sides, up and down the billet, over and over. We'll go up and down this thing at least 2 or 3 times. Usually you would undertake this with a power hammer or better a press, but I don't have either of those. My first attempt, I didn't get any forge welding at all. I think there was a hole in some of my welding. The second attempt, I had partial welds on one side but not the other because I didn't hammer both sides. And the third time, I had some delamination during forming the knife. So it worries me that those mild steel sides came off a little bit, but we're going to grind it clean and see what we have. You can see that nice dark 1095 stripe down the middle, which is our core. I don't see any delamination on the sides. We'll get it back in the heat, hammer it a little flatter, and elongate it a little bit. We're going to try to get 2 knives out of this billet. Looks like we got enough for 2. If you're asking yourself, how's this going to be a 20-minute video when we're more than halfway done with the knife, 3 minutes in, I'll show you how. I've been Kanye'd. I feel like Taylor Swift at the Grammys. Oh, it's at the Music Awards, the MTV Awards. They still play music on MTV. Does it matter? I don't know if Taylor Swift makes music or not. Is that what that is? At any rate, that's why we have a second billet. You guys might really want to see this forged to shape instead of ground away, but hammering introduces a lot of extra stress, especially if an errant blow occurs while the steel is slightly cold. The main reason, though, it's ground to shape is that if the bevels are hammered in, as the blade gets thinner moving from the spine to the edge, so does that 1095 core because it's all hammered to shape. But when you do the finish grinding on these bevels, there's very little of that 1095 core getting exposed, and when it's exposed, it's right next to the edge. If it's left thicker and the knife is ground to shape, then you have to grind away more of the outer layer to get to the core in 0 angle. And the line of demarcation between the black etching 1095 steel and the silver stainless moves back towards the spine of the knife where it's better seen and enjoyed. People ask me often how long it takes to do some of this grinding and cleaning it up, putting in bevels. And you know, it depends. I guess if it's a very simple knife, it might take 20 minutes. If it's a more complicated knife, or you end up really sort of chasing your tail, working out small kinks and introducing new ones, then it might take, you know, an hour or a little more. That's just for the rough grinding. After you heat treat it, you'll come back and do some fine finish grinding, and that process takes some time too. Same with sanding. I get asked a lot about how long it takes to hand finish these knives, and yeah, it's a bit of the same deal. It could take anywhere from maybe 20 or 30 minutes to 1 to 2 hours, just depending on the type of steel and the finish and how fine the grit's going to be and other things. So this is a filing jig. I had to make sure that the knife was going to sit in there at a right angle so that the guard would fit on straight and perpendicular. And now we're going to file in a little shelf or recess there so that the tang extends through the guard, and the blade and ricasso sort of sit on top of the guard, and it'll give it sort of this flush looking fit. It's going into steel foil and then into the heat treat oven for some normalization cycles. The wrench is being used to heat the oil to 120 to 140 degrees. It's Parks 50 fast oil. So there it is, cleaned up, and we'll get it tempered. And you can already see where the line's going to be. It's going to be nice. Here I'm going to clean up the bevels by bending the flexible belt around the corner of the belt sander there. And we'll get into that groove and get it all straightened and cleaned up. I think I learned that watching Gavco's channel. I haven't really shown it in some of my other videos, but you really do alternate when you go through these grits, working your way up to finer and finer grits on the sandpaper and finishing the knives. You alter the direction by 90 degrees. That way it's easier to tell that you've worked out all the scratches from the previous grit, because that's the goal, is to make the finish finer and finer. Wayne Goddard talks about this in one of his books. I think he alters his degrees by 45. I just choose 90 because I think it's easier to do the plunges especially. But otherwise, you're going to be bumping back down in grit as you work your way up to correct some scratches that you missed. I've only taken it to about 1,000 grit before taking it to the buffing wheel, so it's definitely not going to get a mirror polish. There's going to be some residual scratch lines on that. On my wheel, my experience is that I really have to get to about 1,500 to 2,000 grit sanding before I can expect a finer polish from the buffing wheel. I've only done a few hidden tang knives with fitted guards before. They're a little bit tricky. You have to get everything just right. You have to get the hole in the guard material just the right size. And once you start piecing things together, you can work with it to a degree and get things to a high degree of finish. There comes a point in the process where you can no longer go back and work on the finish with any sort of ease or efficiency. For example, if you scratch the top of the guard after it's attached to the knife, you're really going to have a hard time working with that in most cases. So there's a lot of meticulous detail. There's a lot of room for error. I think it's why I don't do a lot of them. It takes an inordinate amount of time, and I'm not sure I have the skill to be efficient at it. You know, I just end up being more frustrated than anything in most cases. The process would go much easier if I had a mill too, but I end up filing this stuff down, which is one reason I use nickel, silver, and brass for guards, because it files very easily as opposed to stainless or carbon steel. All right, tip here for everyone. This is for the advanced knife maker or the simpleton like myself. That black material there is horse stall mat. They sell it to use as knife handles. It makes awful knife handles, but it's great for this, for holding your knife in a vise. I used to use leather to do this, and the knife would slide down while you're hammering on it and all kinds of things. But this stuff holds your knife in place fantastically. I highly recommend it if you guys make knives. Get some of this stuff. So it's just trial and error. Keep going back to it, seeing if it fits. As you get the fit closer and closer, you have to start working on finishing the guard, especially the top of the guard, making sure that it's going to look appropriate, because again, you'll get to a point in this process where you can't come back and do much with it. Same with the knife, more or less. After the guard is finished, it's going to be more difficult to go back and finish the knife. You have to do a lot of your finish polishing before you put things together, which means you have to take great care as you complete the knife. If you put a scratch or gouge in there after the guard's on it, it's going to be very hard to work out and maintain a proper finish. I'm a little bit surprised this stainless etched that deeply. My etchant's not very dilute, so I actually had to go back and dilute it and re-etch it after I polished all that off. The stainless didn't etch in a much more dilute solution, just the carbon steel did, so that made finishing it much easier. Here I'm going to put some JB Weld on the bottom of this just to fill in the gaps. I don't want moisture to collect anywhere under this guard, and so this will not only help sort of solidify it and keep it in place, but it'll also help keep moisture out of there. This will be the handle, and I need to make sure it's square all around. I have to fit the blade in there at right angles or parallel to the long axis. And I have to make sure the block is square because I'm eventually going to set it down on a drill and drill a hole through it. I need the hole to go straight through the burl and the tang. And I also need to drill holes down into it to fit the tang into in the first place. And so if everything's square and true, this process becomes much easier, and you can much more reliably say where your tang is and where to drill holes, and that when you drill the holes, they're going to go straight through and there's going to be symmetry. Even though I drilled the hole mostly out, it still doesn't fit quite deep enough, and my drill bits won't reach all the way, so I burned the tang the rest of the way in, and it worked just fine. Oak is a tough wood, and it would usually be hard to do that, but this oak burl burns just fine. A lot of makers struggle with how to get the epoxy down in that hole all the way, because if you mix it, how do you get it down into that hole? I just pour it down there while it's a little bit loose and in two parts, and then I mix it in the hole, and I've never had any problems. I think it does just fine that way. Surprise! The burl gods are angry. This is why a lot of people don't use burl. You can really get surprised. This wasn't visible from the surface. You had to grind down a couple millimeters and then all of a sudden you have these gaping holes in your knife. So a lot of people don't use burl for that reason. I ended up fitting some epoxy in there and it looked pretty good when all was said and done. It's absolutely hair-raising having the blade that close to the belt sander. If there's a mistake at this point, like I said, that is going to be extremely hard to fix and refinish the blade if you gouge it or anything like that. We're going to sand it to about 800. I took the handle to about 800. So start at 200 and just work our way up. The burl's pretty, it's not as hard as oak, as it goes pretty fast. Same with the nickel silver, everything sands pretty quickly. So into the Danish oil to collect some color, and then we'll start peening our handles. I've never done this before, but I've seen a couple instructionals. This doesn't look too hard. You just fix yourself up a little jig, start pounding on some nickel silver pins. Bada boom, bada bing. Peened handle. So that burl spot did okay. It was mostly hollowed out, but the epoxy fit in there just fine. I took on some of that color, so all that work, and there's this little gap in the back. I don't know how I missed it. It dry fit just fine, and I didn't really check it on the final fit before I put in the JB weld, and I guess that's what I get. But other than that, I'm really happy. I mean, this handle turned out great. I'm super happy about the handle. I've never peened a pin before, and I did it. I've never successfully forge welded stainless, and that came out great. So for me, this is a pretty big success. It's not perfect, far from perfect, but man, did I learn a lot. There's some dirt where the guard meets the knife, but otherwise that's a pretty good fit there, except for the back. Well, this has been a small victory for me. Thank you guys for coming along for the ride. A couple quick announcements. First, I appreciate everyone's help with the charity auctions. We've raised a lot of good money for some good causes. This knife is already spoken for, so don't look for it on eBay, but the future products will certainly be there. Secondly, Fortune Fire, or their casting company, did get in touch with me, and I filled out a questionnaire. It doesn't look like I have enough experience for them to go on the show yet, but they'll be around for a while, and maybe they'll circle back to me and I'll get my shot. In the meantime, thanks for your support, and keep watching, guys. Have a good one.